Ladies and gentlemen, good evening, and welcome back to my Warhammer 40k Space Marine Let's Play. So, we just had our big reveal. It turns out that the Inquisitor this whole time has actually been working for Chaos, and that the item and the power source that we were told could be used to destroy the orcs somehow is actually opening up a giant warp portal that will then bring a bunch of Chaos Marines in to pretty much take over the planet, I assume, create a giant warp storm and terraform the planet into a horrible, chaotic nightmare. And now we're forced to face off against demons and what have you. Now, I was actually curious, and so I did a Google, and it turns out that our main Chaos foe, Nemeroth, that man with the tubes in his mouth and nose and his giant Terminator armor, because I wanted to know what Legion he was a part of, or, I mean, not necessarily Legion, but what he's a part of, and there's no answer. It's never given. It's just deemed that he is a Chaos Space Marine in Terminator armor, and he worships Chaos Undivided, which is kind of the go-to when there's no answer. Now, I mentioned Chaos Undivided earlier when I was listing up the gods, but to get a bit more in depth, generally when legions were, falling, they went and chose a god, a chaos god to worship based on, their personal preferences and, their inclinations. So, those are Khorne, and he's essentially your bloodthirsty god, blood for the blood god, corn for the cornflakes. And so if you just want to get up close and personal and tear people limb from limb, drink their blood, etc., you're going to go Khorne. Then if you want, for example, Nurgle, he is essentially the one who provides you immortality. It's just a really unfortunate form of immortality because he is also the god of essentially pestilence and disease. So you become infested with flies and disgusting, pustules, and you're essentially super duper disgusting. But hey, you get to live forever. And you pretty much just destroy planets by spreading, rot and disease through the whole place. And then you have Slaanesh, or Slaanesh, I don't know, I say Slaanesh. And that's essentially the god of excess. So, I'm gonna, be a glutton. I'm gonna go have tons of crazy, perverted, deviant sex, or, things of that nature. Anything that's excessive, is the realm of Slaanesh. The best thing that Slaanesh actually provided the Chaos Marines was the Sound Marines, if you're unaware, which are essentially just, Chaos Space Marines who wield giant sonic blasters. They're the best. They are top-notch. I believe, don't quote me though, that Chris Robertson's Imperial Fist novel, I think he only ever wrote the one, but I think the antagonist on there are Emperor's Children Sonic Noise Marines. Now, the Emperor's Children was one of the original legions that existed, and they're the ones who primarily fell to Slaanesh to begin with. There is actually a short story involving Noise Marines. I can't remember where you can find them again. There's a lot of omnibuy that are put out that are just an accumulation of short stories. They have some dedicated to Warhammer 40k. They have some that are just dedicated to the Hammer and Bolter Games Workshop magazine that they put out. And one of them just involves essentially I believe it's an Imperial Guard high-ranking official going to the opera essentially to see his brother perform, I believe, someone perform from his family. And the performance starts and then it goes wild and crazy, and suddenly people are doing crazy things. And luckily, obviously, because you need to have a story somehow, it turns out that he was just going there for support. He's never been able to understand music in general, and it just doesn't sound good to him, regardless of what it is. So somehow that provides him an immunity to the chaotic noise that is being performed in this orchestra. And so it turns out it's actually an invasion by, I believe, the Emperor's Children. And what that means is that he then runs away back to the compound. And it turns out that the Imperial Guard are essentially all becoming crazy, so he orders them all to quite literally burst their eardrums. So that they can fight and not turn to chaos and fall to chaos, because it's all done through sound. He has them all burst their eardrums, and then they march out and they all die anyway. But still, pretty good short story, if I do say so myself. But we're getting distracted. So then the next one is, of course, Tzeentch, the god of change. This guy, arguably, I would say he's the most powerful of the Chaos gods, because Tzeentch can just change and adapt to essentially everything. Obviously, you know, it's dependent upon how whoever's dealing with, you know, the source material wants to deal with it, but generally Tzeentch is the most powerful. But, and then you have Chaos Undivided, which is just the stand-all where they don't worship a particular god, and they just do essentially, you know, they're evil, quotation marks. Well, not quotation marks, they are evil. But for example, the Night Lords are said to just worship Chaos Undivided. Now, if your Legion or what have you does end up worshiping Chaos Undivided, it is possible that they can, you know, lean one way or another. For example, the Night Lords, while most of them want to remain pure and not deal with, you know, any of the gods, they just want to be their own guys. Some of them, for I believe the guy who's leading the company in Night Lords is falling to Nurgle, I believe, and then there is a member of the company or whatever grouping that they use who is, you know, a core knight, so he pretty much spends his entire time going crazy and just, you know, killing people and going into a red murderous rage. It's so bad that supposedly, spoilers, he's going through the ship and just killing his own people too. But yeah, so essentially, Nemeroth shows up and he's like, haha, this was all a ploy. And it turns out that way back when we got that message from the Inquisitor for help, it was already too late. The Inquisitor had been hunted down and killed by a demon, and then the demon took his form. So that Inquisitor we were with this whole time was actually a demon working for Nemeroth. It is kind of odd how they have Nemeroth essentially inhale the demon, but, I mean, whatever, I'll accept the liberties taken. So yeah, we did end up, I bypassed it, but we picked up another upgrade, and instead of this one upgrading our Fury, it increases essentially our shield, which is always nice to have, if I do say so myself. And now we have to face off a bunch against enemies. But again, if you aren't aware, Shoulder Charge is just overpowered beyond belief, because of course it is. The only exception is Chaos Space Marines now are actually incredibly dangerous for us. This is the reason why I'm not going Thunderhammer, because just getting into melee range with them is just a fiasco and takes a lot of time and effort, and I would take a lot of damage for not much reward. Which is why if I get a straight headshot with a las cannon, they will pretty much instantly die, and if I don't, it takes 2 or 3 hits. One shot, though, will essentially stagger them so that they get, you know, the stun marking above them, but of course I'm so far away I'm not going to be dealing with that. The other thing, of course, is I do want to get a plasma cannon.
The Codex Astartes warns that those in league with Chaos can withstand the warp's touch.
You forget yourself, Ultramarine.
Leandros, I do not take this warp resistance lightly, but the search for answers must wait until after we deal with this Chaos invasion.
What if that is too late?
Leandros, enough. We need to keep moving.
Yep, so we have our plan, which is essentially, once again, we need to stop all the invasions, stop the enemies, because, I mean, that's the broad strokes of everything that the Space Marines end up doing. But yeah, so I think my final loadout for this, when I get around to it, is it's just going to be, you know, bolter, plasma pistol, force axe, las cannon, and plasma cannon. Just because it will end up being essentially the best way for me to deal with enemies. You'll notice that now we're also facing Chaos infected guardsmen, or not infected. Well, I guess they are infected, but they're Chaos worshipping guardsmen, because there are always going to be, you know, grunts on the ground that we need to murder horribly. Also, I don't think I ever made mention of it, but we also picked up a Kraken bolter. It's just a more powerful bolter. I'll be honest, I don't think I've ever heard of it in the lore. I'm sure it must exist if they brought this out, but in any of the novels they read, I've never heard mention of Kraken bolters. I'm assuming that's a tabletop thing, but as I mentioned before, I don't follow tabletop. But yeah, so there's you know our I wish they were Noise Marines. Unfortunately, they aren't. These are just, you know, plasma cannon wielding guys. They deal tons of damage because of course they do, but we're just going to one-shot them with our las cannon and be on our merry way. Now that we've essentially commenced the end game, we're now in a situation where I constantly want to be, you know, rotating through the weapons that I'm using. Earlier on at the beginning of the game, the worst thing that was ending up happening to me was I would run out of, you know, bolter shells, and then I was kind of screwed. Or I'd run out of, you know, I don't know, stalker bolter or something, and I never really liked using the vengeance launcher to begin with. I don't really like it as a weapon, because it turns out when I'm over here dealing with, you know, weapons and, oh my gosh, please, thank you. When you are actually fighting and using weapons and you come across an ammo stash, the ammo stash isn't restricted to any particular thing. So if I pick up an ammo stash, it will give me, say, 5 las cannon rounds. It'll give me 5 or 50, you know, plasma cannon rounds, and it'll also give me, I don't know, let's say 50 bolter rounds. Now, if I, you know, was at full ammo on 2 of the 3, and I only needed bolter rounds, it would still only give me 50 bolter rounds. It wouldn't, you know, give me 150. So the best way to actually play this game is to constantly be rotating through your guns and not actually be saving your strongest guns for, you know, a really strong enemy. Now, granted, the guns that I have are technically really only good against strong enemies, obviously, but it does mean that I have a lot more leeway in using the strongest weapons that I have, which is a really nice thing, because I am one of those people who, when they play games, will hoard all the best stuff because, oh, maybe I'll need it later, maybe I'll need it later, maybe I'll need it later. No, here it's best for you to just use whatever you get. It's more fun, and I will immediately say I am a huge proponent of, when you're playing a game, to be able to do the most fun thing without getting penalized for it. But yeah, so we pretty much get to just always use whatever guns you want. A nice thing that you'll notice here is the orcs and chaos are indiscriminate. There's no good or bad guys. It's essentially, you know, even your good aligned factions fight other good aligned factions. You are never friends with anyone. I say that, but there is a slight exception there. While there are instances of humans and Eldar kind of working together, the Eldar, of course, look down on humans like crazy and call them monkey, which, believe it or not, sounds like monkeys. Oh man. But more importantly, humans are more inclined to work together with Tau. There are a lot of instances of essentially humans and Tau coming to agreements on particular matters. For instance, in one of the Caiaphas Cain novels, it turns out that the Tau and the Tau actually end up giving a planet to the Imperial Guard because they deem it's not worth the fight. It turns out because there is a gene stealer infestation going on the planet, they're more than happy to work together with them in order to, you know, defeat the Tyranids beforehand. They're very, like, realistic in terms of who they should be fighting. And to be fair, humans, the Imperial Guard as a whole, are also, you know, willing to compromise in that way. But then ultimately, if it ever came down to it, humans would say, yeah, no, screw you guys, time to fight you, no end. And yeah, there is actually, later on, they do end up dealing with the Tau on a more permanent basis, because they just, humanity's strung out very, very thinly, and they quite literally just want the Tau to just end up being a bulwark against a Tyranid invasion so that they can go forward and just concentrate their efforts elsewhere. It's pretty ridiculous. And again, there is essentially the Tau, because they do everything for the greater good. They think that they're super altruistic, and once again, they just do excessive scientific advancement, which is something that is kind of stalled on humanity's side. But their caste system essentially is designed in such a way where if they see that something's futile or will actually end up costing a lot of lives, they're more than happy to pack up, go home, and go focus their efforts elsewhere. There are many instances where, and for some reason it's always versus Tyranids. As I mentioned earlier in the Ultramarines books, there is one part of the Tau where the Ultramarines pretty much just, you know, curb stomp down into the Tau camp and just start fighting and killing dudes. And then the Tau's response to this is, really, we're kind of on, you know, death's door here, and you are just super focused on killing us, and you will kill yourselves in the process. Are you really willing to essentially commit suicide just to kill as many Tau as possible? And they're like, yeah, man, we're Ultramarines. And Tau are like, okay, we'll leave. It's fine. Or again, with, as I mentioned, the Kivas Kane one, where they go, oh man, this is a huge Gene Stealer infestation. You guys are fighting like crazy, and you know we're kind of here, and we just wanted to, you know, we were spreading our joy and peace and the greater good to you people, but you're not appreciating it, and now there's a huge Gene Stealer infestation. And are you willing to? And there's like, well, we're not backing down here. We will literally burn this planet to the ground before we leave it to you. And they're like, okay, we'll leave. We'll go somewhere else. And that's pretty much how the Tau work. Because again, while there are bajillions of humans, they cannot be everywhere. Especially when you're dealing with universe threats like the Tyranids, who have, you know, their giant Hive Fleets, is that what it is? Like Hive Fleet Kraken and Hive Fleet Behemoth, I believe. Those are the two major ones. And yeah, so against things like that, where quite literally... so, let's explain Tyranids quick. Sorry, I'm keeping distracted because there's so much lore, and it's just, you know, so in-depth, and I love Warhammer 40k lore. It's just great, and it's so unique. So anyway, so essentially the way Tyranids work are, you have, you know, it's a hive mind, so the ships appear, they're these giant living ships, and when they approach a planet, they rain down a bunch of spores, and when the spores land, a bunch of creatures just pop out of them, right? And so those are your Hormagaunts, your Termagants, just, you know, regular ground troops, and then you have larger tyrant forms, and there's also, you know, like lickers and other creatures that you don't really need to worry about, but these larger forms control the smaller ones. And so, of course, the best way to fight them are to kill the tyrants, to then, you know, ruin their focused will, and then you can concentrate on just mopping up the smaller guys, and it's not a big problem. But the way Tyranids work is they just want to consume all organic matter known to man. So what they end up doing is once they land on a planet, they establish these pools, and these are just, you know, digestive pools that they have. And so they will just grab everything, and they eat everything. So they'll eat people, they'll eat all vegetation, everything known that can't be nailed down, and they eat it all, and they essentially regurgitate it into these digestive pools, which then in turn spit out more Tyranids. And so eventually over time, which isn't a very long time at all because it spread so freaking quickly, the planet is bare bones and literally rock. It just becomes just a rock because there's nothing else on it. And at that point, all the Tyranids that were on the planet, they jump and commit suicide and jump into the digestive pools to then be sucked up again by the ships to then continue on the next one. Now there are some instances where they don't even bother with oh gosh, what are they called? As I die. Oh my gosh, that's what I get for getting distracted. But I believe there are some instances where they just don't even bother with sending down spores if the planet is, you know, not inhabited or whatever, and there's still vegetation on it. They can pretty much just eat it all directly from the atmosphere. So yeah, so Tyranids are just this world-spanning threat, and they will just consume everything in their path, and the more they consume, the stronger they get, which is why they're such a threat to essentially every other race, because humans, orcs, what have you, they're all made of organic matter. You're kind of screwed. I feel like maybe the orcs were made to fight the Tyranids initially. I can't remember. There is some ancient lore about that I mentioned earlier, where the orcs were created by, I believe, the Eldar to fight some global threat. It might be the Tyranids. I cannot recall. But the one thing that I've never had dealt with, and the one thing that I really want to know, is who would win between Necrons and Tyranids. Now, for me personally, I believe the Necrons would win because you can't beat Necrons. But more importantly, it's entirely based on the fact that neither needs supply lines. Well, I mean, okay, Tyranids kind of need supply lines because they need to have access to their digestive pools, just in the same way that Necrons need to have access to wherever it is they get teleported to, you know, be remade. But they don't need, you know, stuff to live, I guess. It's a really odd way to say it, but they don't need it. You know, humans. You know, you need shelter, you need food, you need, you know, morale and all this crap, and none of that applies to either Necrons or Tyranids. So I'm really curious about who would end up winning. I feel like it'd be Necrons only because, as far as I'm aware, Necrons material is just, I mean, it's inorganic stuff, and I'm not sure that Tyranids can eat Necrons. I mean, obviously they can eat the bodies of the Necrons if, when the Necron dies, it gets teleported away to go get repaired, which isn't always the case if you recall. I mean, the main way to make sure a Necron stays dead is to just melt them into goop. And I'm not sure that Tyranids actually have a way to do that. One of the main weapons that exist for Tyranids, especially their ranged units, their Termagants, I believe it is, are fleshborer cannons. And what that is literally a gun that is part of their body, and it shoots out these small beetle forms which die almost immediately. If I shot it at a wall and it just hit the wall, as soon as the beetles hit the ground, they're dead. Their lifespan is nothing. But what they're really good at is if I shoot it at a person and it hits them, those beetles will immediately burrow into their skin and eat them from the inside out and just kill them. But if you were to shoot it, of course, at a Necron, there's nothing to eat there. They can't eat the metal of the Necron, so the fleshborer beetles are just useless. I mean, yeah, they can probably... I think the Tyrants have venom cannons, which might be able to melt, kind of like melta-cannons, but those are only on Tyrants, which are the larger forms. And also, I mean, once you add into that the Gauss flares that the Necrons have, where they can quite literally just, you know, shoot a beam which dissolves everything into nothing, I mean, it means that the Tyranids can't even eat their own dead in order to replenish their ranks, because it gets dissolved into nothing. It gets like dissolved into atoms. So just the fact that I personally believe that while it would be a long fight, and you know it'd be a grindy one, I think that over time the Necrons would just grind out the Tyranids, and that's just how it would end. I'm sure some people are like, no, that's not how it would go, and it might be up for contention, but that's the way I figure it would end up going, but what do I know? So yeah, there we go. So right now, essentially, we're at this weird position where we need to stop this Chaos Gate from opening, and from essentially destroying this world that we have come to save. Because not only Forge Worlds are incredibly important, when it comes to the worlds, I mean, obviously, they're whatever the writer wants to make, which of course it is, but there are many types of worlds which are only specialized in a single thing. So, for example, Forge Worlds, they literally are just giant manufactoria that pump out bullets and tanks and, you know, titans and whatever have you. And they're also, you know, just, crap, there's a name for them, but they're essentially just farming planets where literally the entire planet is just there to harvest food to help feed the Imperium. And so there's a bunch of specialized planets, and they're all essential. Now, of course, there are some that are deemed, you know, just backwater planets, which are kind of planets that are kind of sort of ignored. They don't really have a full purpose other than, you know, humans live on them. And they generally get ignored, which is why they're so ripe for chaos invasions, because it's really easy to establish cults in them. But here we have a Manufactoria, and we cannot afford to lose it. So our primary goal here is to finally, for some bizarre reason, show up and be like, okay, we need to get our Titans active here and get them, you know, into the fight, destroy the Spire, and end this invasion before it can begin. Because it turns out that over time, the warp portal that exists is being made into, is growing larger, which will eventually allow for the Chaos ships to come through. And once the Chaos ships are through, you're going to get a full-blown invasion. You know, they'll be able to fight in the atmosphere, pretty much destroying, you know, any Imperial fleets that are remaining. Because believe it or not, Orcs are still somehow good at destroying Imperial fleets. Somehow. Also, you'll notice there I finally got a real plasma cannon. So I'm not using the melt anymore. I finally have my plasma cannon. It's really good for AoE, like I mentioned. And also we're going to take this heavy bolter because heavy bolters are great. But yeah. They never really mentioned it, but why... Well, okay, they kind of lampshade it, but I don't believe it for a second. Because we're going to get to the Titan. And it's going to turn out that they can't move and do anything because their mooring clamps are still connected. So we're going to have to go and remove those mooring clamps at some point. That seems really weird to me, Why the heck would a Titan ever put itself, you know, in such a position where if there are mooring clamps attached, they cannot remove them from their own, like from their own cockpit? Now I say cockpit, but depending on the size and the size of the Titan and what it does, there can be, you know, many conductors, pilots. There's really only one major one who ends up, you know, living in a goop tube, and it connects itself, you know, mechanically to the Titan, so it can feel the pain that the Titan feels and all this. We also have a bunch of other pilots who, you know, work the guns, for instance, and all this other stuff. But so it seems incredibly odd to me that they don't have the ability from being on the Titan in order to remove these clamps. Because as soon as the Orc invasion had begun, they should have been out running around and destroying the world. Because that's what Titans do. They are the final weapon of the Imperium, essentially. Like, imagine how great a Baneblade is, which is an Imperial Guard tank, the best tank known to man, as all the Leman Russ lovers start reeing in the distance. But you take the Baneblade, and a Titan is just so much better in every way, shape, or form. And so I don't know why they haven't been out there doing their thing already, and I don't know why there are quite literally hundreds of these people, because again, while there's only really like 3 pilots at a time ish, there might be even more on the larger variants. Why the heck are they just sitting in the Titan doing nothing? Like, they're quite literally inside the Titan not doing anything. They're just chilling there. Why wouldn't they have, you know, if necessary, tried to send someone out to release the mooring clamps? Because it seems to me that having a giant Titan running around would be really great against these Orcs, who quite obviously do not yet have a foothold in order to establish any sort of mechanical dominance. Because again, I will say this section right here is actually one of the worst sections. This is kind of a run for your life and hope you succeed type thing. Somehow, because they're mentally deficient in God knows how many ways, the Imperial Guards have all of their sentry guns set up running from a single generator. One generator, which they somehow weren't able to defend properly, and so all of their guns, which are holding back the Orc swarms, have been shut down. So our goal here is to go up against this, you know, infinite spawning Orc mob and turn on this generator, which means that I'm going to run over here and just turn it on as quickly as possible, which will then turn on these guns and stem the tide. I mean, good job, Imperial Guard. You literally have one primary job here, which was, you know, to stop this Orc advance and defend your single generator, and you couldn't do it. Unfortunate, but whatever. And why did I forgot what I was talking about. Good job, me. Oh, yeah, so Orcs, again, are very odd in that they have, you know, specialized, or I'm not going to say specialized units. I would say more along the lines of there are individual Orcs that are then given gifts from their gods, Gork and Mork. And so, as I mentioned earlier, you know, one became a Psyker, and so you have, you know, the Orc Shamans, you know, one who is given, you know, a bit more intellect and is incredibly aggressive is then able to, you know, take all the disparate tribes and bring them together, and they become a war boss. And there's also the Engineers. So, among Orc Waz, and, you know, just tribes in general, here and there are Orcs who for some reason just have a gift when it comes to creating and commandeering and just dealing with mechanical stuff in general. What this means is that if they destroy an Imperial tank, they will then take the remnants of the tank, bring it to these Orc engineers, and the engineers will then make them into their own tanks that work and function somehow without, you know, the blessings of the machine god. And they do this for everything. They even make their own version of Titans, which I still can't remember what the name of them are. So it's incredibly dangerous, and you'd think that by being on a Manufactoria world, they would then be having their engineers, you know, building a crap ton of tanks and walkers and what have you, but we don't see them here. So it'd be really great for the Titans to be running around, you know, stopping them from being able to do that, but they aren't. So here we finally go up against the War Boss. The War Boss, as you recall, was last seen dragging Nemroth off and falling to his death for the second time. But he's here, and we're here to fight him. It's a pretty simple fight. Honestly, the best thing that I recommend using, as long as you're not getting smashed and dying, is to use the Plasma Cannon. Because, once again, the Orc War Boss will... Oh my gosh, please don't blind me. You're the worst, I hate you. The Orc War Boss runs into walls and quite literally just, you know, summons a whole bunch of mobs to then fight with him. And so, as I mentioned earlier, the full charge Plasma Cannon will also give you really great AoE damage. So while you're aiming at the Orc War Boss, you can also just essentially vaporize his any of the minions he spawns. Here's the part where I am going to complain a little bit about the Plasma Cannon in general. It's very finicky sometimes if you're trying to do, you know, things too fast. You'll see a lot of times where I end up walking and it looks like I'm trying to charge up a shot, and a shot just won't end up charging up. It turns out that depending on if you start trying to shoot your gun too quickly after a roll or something, it just won't register, and your charge beam will not start charging. Kinda sucks, especially when you're dealing with, you know, having to vent it after every shot and things like that. Minor nitpick, but it does happen a lot. Like right there, that it wasn't even half a second, it was like a quarter second before anything even happened. That was me trying to do it, realizing that it wasn't going to charge, and then I had to, you know, essentially take my finger off the trigger and restart it. I will also make mention of, much like in Dark Souls, I hate it when they take away vision. It's okay in, you know, multiplayer games, because it's essentially what it's, you know, fair, air quotes, you know, Rainbow Six Siege will give you, you know, flashbangs to use against your enemies and things like that. Doesn't feel as good in a single player game where, you know, enemies literally know where you are at all times. If they see you, they know where you are. They don't get blinded. They quite literally just know where you are and you can't see anything. Slightly annoying. It's not, honestly, in this fight, it's not that bad, if we're going to be brutally honest about it. It's just a slight annoyance. But luckily we have infinite ammo, pickups that we can go through. We're fighting this final war boss, and we're going to kill him. Come on, fall. There he goes. Look at that. Stupid dick. Now he's dead. I'll see you in the next one.
I ain't finished with you yet, Space Marine!
But I am finished with you, Orc.